It's great to be here, and thank you, Mary Ann, for facilitating, and Craig for curating. And the interns have been great. Ashley and Kyla, Dane is here. I also want to thank Randy, the carpenter, who helped us with the pedestals, and Erin Stover, who was the, what was her title?
She was the exhibition/program manager.
Yeah, and she visited my studio about 2 years ago, and that's how this whole ball got rolling. Yeah, so I have an MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I was a painter until halfway through my studies. And my training as an undergrad was as a shop teacher, industrial arts teacher, and as an art teacher. And so just as soon as I finished my undergraduate degree is when all the schools were taking shop classes out of their schools. And so my timing was perfect. And so I focused more on my art and went to grad school, and I made the transition from painting to sculpture then. And that was, I was able to use my technical skills in metalworking and woodworking to execute sculpture. And, so that's how I got started. And a lot of my ideas came from, my ideas come from my visual scrapbook. I mean, we're all collecting things that we see, and there's certain things that we have in common, like how many of us have seen Avatar and Gone with the Wind and those things, and there's combinations of things that I have that are unique to, and you have that are unique. So I mind that, and some of my work is very autobiographical. And at one point, I moved to Athens, Ohio, from the Great Lakes area where I grew up in Chicago. And when I moved to Athens, which is a landlocked community, I started to bring my love of ship modeling into my work. My Uncle John was a real good craftsman. He made the finest ship models. But I wasn't content to make ship models. I made a series of works called Speculative Naval Architecture, and this one here is one of the first ones I made. And so this was called Stealth Conveyance. Other ones had political content, or they had autobiographical content. I made a piece about becoming a father. I made a piece about the death of my father. That all happened in the same year. And so I unloaded some personal baggage with all that. And then when I moved to Norfolk, where I'm a professor right now, then I started making stuff with wheels on it. So, landlocked location, I made ship forms down on the port, in the ports, and now I make wheeled vehicles. And that's where these scale conveyances come from. I got into the scales when I worked in a factory when I was 19 years old. I worked a punch press, which would knock out large discs of metal, and the discs were waste, so they would go in a bin, and they would keep the part. And often thought, I tried to think of ways I could use those. And at the time, I had a 49 Chevy pickup truck. The idea was I was going to build a brown camper on the back and cover it with these big brown discs, so it looks like a fish riding on the back. And that never happened. But I did remember how enamored I was of that scale effect. And so, later on, maybe when I was 40 years old, I finally made my first piece with scales. And these are, the ones in here are from photo offset lithography printing plates. And I'll pass these around. If you look at them, you'll see that there's a print on the back and images on the back. And I punch those out one at a time with a hole punch. And then I attach them with a hot glue gun. This piece over here with the piece of turf comes from my influence in model scenery and model railroading. As a kid, growing up in Chicagoland, field trips would take me to this place called the Museum of Science and Industry and the Field Museum of Natural History. And they had great dioramas there. They had the biggest model train thing. And as a 7th grader, I just went nuts over that stuff, and I never let go. And so model scenery is in my blood from way back. And the other thing that I liked about visiting those museums was how things were displayed. Dioramas always appealed to me. And the casework, like for instance, that piece in the the corner, that Divine Imperial Commuter, that's like, you know, a vitrine, or you know, Lenin would be seen in there, the body of Nikolai Lenin, you know, that kind of thing. So I'm always interested in that too. And so the modeled scenery also appears in this piece here, which is called Gleam and Freedom. And I did a series of works called 3D political cartoons, and that started when the Iraq War happened. So I mean, had some very strong feelings about that. But anyway, this one is in response to George Bush's second inaugural, where he used the word freedom 75 times. You know, that was documented. And so I started to think about, well, why would he? What does that mean to Americans? You know, and so of course he had a little gas station in there, and so on and so forth. So the other thing that this piece is about is conspicuous consumption. Like, I could have just made a very plain box for it, but conspicuous consumption means that I had to doll it up. And so I became really well aware of conspicuous consumption by the amount of times I had to go back to the lumberyard and kept buying lumber, you know, to add all these superfluous moldings and stuff. Okay, going back and forth. Any questions so far? No? Yeah, this also has little optic fibers in it that go to nightlight bulbs. It's on an armature made out of poultry netting or chicken wire. So when I walked to work, I had this routine where I'd pass this woman who would get out of a Lincoln Navigator, and she must have weighed maybe 90 pounds. And the Lincoln Navigator is probably 5,000 pounds or whatever. And so I was very smug because I could walk to work, you know. I'm the smug pedestrian. And so this is called the Divine Imperial Commuter. It's designed to only carry 2 people. Half a block to buy a pack of smokes. Okay. And you know, this was a response to the Iraq War too. And the casework is made out of white oak. The train form, car form is basswood, carved basswood with graphite. It has over 1,000 little tiny nails, scutcheon pins pounded in, and it has 60 wheels on it. So there's a certain obsessiveness to some of what I do. And this piece right here, that has like 10,000 scales on it. And this piece came about by me working my idea out with clay. I use modeling clay to work my ideas out, and basically I had this lump of it, and I squeezed it and extruded out between my fingers and each end of my hand, and then that was a suggestion. And so just the act of squeezing the clay was the beginning of this piece here. And I noticed it was turning into like a dinosaur form, or like a stegosaurus or something like that, and hence the name Cretaceous mode. And these are made out of rigid styrofoam, and then coated with resin, and then hot glue. I hot glue those things on one at a time. And that was my month of November, just putting the scales on, of 2010, I think is when I did that.
So from the clay form to this form, how did you scale it up? I mean, was it just eyeballed?
Well, I also had a drawing in there, and when you draw, I draw stuff on graph paper. So drawing on graph paper allows me to pump it up. It's a lot of tweaking though. This one was turned on a lathe. I made a large gob of styrofoam and turned it on the lathe. That was fun. And this one is made out of MDF and epoxy that I cast in molds. I made a mold for the hemispheres, and I used epoxy and fiberglass. So when I talk about conveyance, you know, this being an expressive medium is conveying something. Plus, conveyance has an extra meaning of, you know, having a message. So that's why they're called conveyances. So this one's made out of carved MDF, medium density fiberboard. And I bought the figurine from a hobby store. But everything else I made, it's got cotton. Personal watercraft is the legal definition of a jet ski. And I've got something against those. I'm the kind of guy that would paddle a canoe rather than drive around a jet ski. Well, my dad was a preacher. Maybe I'm doing a different kind of preaching now. So the other thing I wanted to mention about this is this one was
influenced by a film I saw on PBS, and it was a video of how they moved the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. Anybody ever see that? They had to build these special truck trailers for it, and they moved it like, like it would take like a whole day to move it 500 yards. They had, it was awesome that they took this tall brick structure and they were able to move it and not have it tip over or crumble. And they had all this special leveling equipment in it to have that happen. And so this is called 05 Nomad, because that was the year I moved to Norfolk. And it was such an odious task packing up stuff from Athens and moving it to Norfolk that I had to commemorate it with a sculpture. That one in the corner, that's made out of white oak. That weighs about 150 pounds. This one here, the faceted conveyance, probably weighs less than 10 pounds. They look like they have weight. What I do is I buy the 2-inch and I stack it into big blocks, and then I go at it with an electric carving knife and hacksaw blades and rasps and files. And the thing is about, I love that sound. The thing is about working with styrofoam, I have kind of a love-hate relationship, because as an environmentalist, I'm well aware of the plastics industry and how it can be so degrading in the environment. I don't know if you've heard of Pacific Gyre. This is also known as the Pacific Garbage Patch. And most of it is floating plastic that is there. So I like to get scrap styrofoam whenever I can. Any other questions? No? Okay. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks a lot.